Everyone, Savage Worlds Pathfinder is a pretty cool fantasy supplement that Peg put out that is really fun and exciting. But one of the things that came along with it that sometimes people don't realize is the thing called the Quick Chase deck. And that provides a new way of handling chases when you're talking about on foot chases or slower things like an animal, like riding a horse chase. Doesn't matter if it's fantasy, but it's pretty cool, and we're going to talk about it.
It's a savage world.
Hey everyone, it's Carl with Eric.
Hello!
And this is Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. And we are going to talk about the Savage Worlds Quick Chase deck, or you might call it the Narrative Chase deck, depending on whether you're going what's written on the rules or what's written on the box. So we're going to probably call it the Quick Chase rules.
The Quick Narrative Chase deck. That would also work if you just jam them both in.
Plus. Yeah, for sure. And so let's talk about that and learn a little bit how it works. I'm going to throw it over to Eric. I mentioned that this is primarily for kind of foot chases, horse chases, kind of the slower chases. If you want to use like ship-to-ship combat or something like that, car chases, the rules in the core book are where you want to go. You don't want to use these rules. These rules are very good for what they're designed for. And I'm going to let Eric go ahead and, kind of give us an overview of the basics of the rules, some of the key things, and then we'll talk through each step of the way for everyone to understand.
Yeah, so very basically, it is a deck of cards. It's 54 cards, so it's all the suits and ranks like a normal deck. But there's extra stuff on them. So you have the 52 cards plus 2 jokers. So very basically, in a quick chase, it lasts 5 rounds. So it has an end point, unlike normal chase rules, which are kind of until the person gets away. And during these rounds, everybody's trying to get chase tokens to win the chase. Each character and each group of extras or extra wild card or like groups gets their own card each round. And you very basically then from your hand, you choose one of your cards that you want to play. You play them face down. Once they're all placed face down, you reveal them at the same time. And then there's instructions on the cards that change stuff. And then you take actions. And we'll talk about the actions that you can do. And then at the very end of those 5 rounds, if the prey has the most tokens, they get away. And this is something that was a little nebulous, but basically, if it's the even amount of tokens, then the pursuer wins. And in the case of, say, like one player had more tokens and one player had less, then it's kind of up to the players how they want to do it. Is what we talked about. Is the one player. If you have less, you've lost no matter what, and this person catches that player. So if the other player wants to go get help or wants to join them in a fight, whatever, that's their choice. So that's the very basics. Carl, what's the deal with these cards? Like, what's the components of these cards?
I'm glad you asked. So kind of hard to see it on the screen, but these cards, and you'll see it in the video. I'll put it up. So these cards have a few pieces of them. Obviously, Eric talked about it's got the suit, like a King of Clubs, whatever. It has a title. So the card I'm looking at is King of Clubs called Tumble. That's its title. And then there's a description of something that happens during this turn based on the card. So in this case, it talks about at the start of the turn, as a free action, make athletics roll or lose all your chase tokens. So that's something that happens as part of the card. There's also, and we probably should talk through that maybe a little bit later, there's also whether it's a complication, whether it's something that continues throughout the entire turn, or one of those such. And then it's got, the key thing on it is it's got a chase number. And that's a bonus that you get to apply to that chase roll that Eric talked about. And it's, can be a
or
plus
a negative.
Or a negative, right? So it could be a +0, +2, -2, -4. It goes as low as -4, as far as I saw in the deck. And then that's the penalty that you have when you're doing your chase roll. So it's got the chase roll penalty or bonus. It has whether it's a special kind of card like a complication or ongoing or have you. And then it has that description of something that happens when you play this card.
Yeah. and the kind of title, and it also has like artwork on it. It has individual artwork on each card that kind of matches the title, and that's the narrative part of it, is the title and the picture. And it really reminds me of on our podcast, Mastering the RPG. One of the
Did
cool
you say
stuff
Mastering the RPG?
I did see Mastering the RPG.
MasteringTheRPG.com.
Everywhere you can find podcasts.
Where
but on one of those
podcasts are
episodes,
sold.
we talk about, we have cool stuff, or we talk about like stuff we found, and I often do. I've started to do kind of like little board games or little card games that go along with RPGs. And one of them I brought up was the both the I, My Dark Overlord, and that has like titles and pictures on it. And part of that is you use those for inspiration in telling your story. And that's similar to this. So I just want to go, that artwork is very evocative of things. And so is the title. And that's the narrative part, is that it's just kind of there to influence you, is like, describing like how your character, how they lost all their chase tokens, kind of based on the picture and how it might relate to the chase you're doing. So that's the narrative part. Anyways, let's talk about how the rounds work. So more specifically, on each round, the GM deals cards to every single player and NPC or NPC group. Like every wild card gets their own, and every extra group gets their own chase card. And there's this cool thing here where if a character is faster than all the opponents that are there, then they get an extra chase card per round. And if they're twice as fast, they get 2 extra chase cards. Now, again, this is against your opponent. So if both player characters, if one player character is like, if all the NPCs have a pace of 5, and one player character has a pace of 6, and the other player character has a pace of 10, then the one player character would get 1 extra one, and the one that has a pace of 10 would get 2. So it's not like, so my point is that like it's just against your opponent whether how many cards you get extra. That could be a little confusing, but so each round you might be getting 1, but you might be getting more depending on your speed. Then when you have a hand, everybody chooses one of those cards. The GM will choose a card for each of their extras or extra groups, and you place it face down so nobody else can see. Yep, just like that. And then once everything's face down, you flip them up, showing your cards, and then it goes through a normal initiative order. So, starting with the ace or the joker. There are jokers, so jokers would go first, and then starting with your ace, going down normally with ranks and suits. But now, one thing to specify here is that this is not normal initiative.
This is not initiative
at all. So edges, hindrances, things like free actions like that, like counterattack or first strike. I mean, that would normally trigger off of like stuff like that. It doesn't apply. Oh, actually, no, sorry. Quick strike. That's sorry. I meant like quicker calculating initiatives, like edges like that don't apply. I guess first strike might. No, I don't even know if first strike would necessarily apply. That's something we can talk about later. But it's not regular initiative. Now, when we've played this, we have not allowed people to hold their action and to kind of go at different times and then interrupt. But Carl, I think you were saying you saw something.
I watched. So Shane did an example with a couple of players for the Kickstarter, and in that video. And of course, in the comments, you can tell me if I'm wrong if you watch the video. If I remember right, in the video, one of the players did go on hold. They held up their action because they had the ability to make somebody distracted, and you know how distracting works. They wanted to go at a different point in a turn. Now they never interrupted. The goblins in this chase, they went and then they just went. So they never interrupted the goblins' action. So that I can't say whether it's possible. I would think that's probably not, because it's just an action. It's not like a move in an action. So, but that was the example that Shane had. But I think that's kind of going to be up to the game master, because it is,
of course,
a little nebulous whether that makes sense to them or not to allow for that. I also wanted to throw in real quick, the Joker you mentioned is just like a normal Joker in the sense that you get a +2. But what's not normal about it is as soon as the Joker comes up, you pull another card from the chase deck and you play that. And that's the thing that defines what happens in the turn.
Well, real quick, so normally, when the Joker, if you have a Joker, you choose an additional card from your hand as your active card. And if you don't have one, then you pull one from the deck.
Good point.
If you had multiple cards, you have to then play one of your cards. If you don't have one, you play. So it could be really bad for you in some ways, because some of the cards are pretty bad. But that's, normally if you only have one card per round, then you're kind of like stuck with having a bad card. So speed is huge. We'll talk about that later. So yeah, you play down the card, but yeah, you get a +2 on all of the stuff that you do, and everybody gets a Benny on your side.
Yep.
So it's just like a normal Joker, except that you have to play another card to have its active effect be differently. And then when a Joker is pulled, unlike other times, because normally at the end of the round you keep however big your hand is, but when a Joker is pulled, then everybody has to discard everything but one card. So sometimes in this you'll have like multiple cards, so you have to discard onto one card, and then the deck is shuffled again. So kind of normal, but it's a little weird with that. You actually have to, if you're somebody that has a big hand, you'll lose all the cards except for one card.
And there's a lot of cards in the deck that, that description of what happens adds cards to your hand. So when you start off, you're saying, oh, well, I only get one card and I keep playing that card. Well, the deck has things that drive up the hands. And when we were playing our example, I think I had 5 cards in my hand ultimately, or 6 cards, because I was a little bit faster, and there's a bunch of cards that gave me extra cards. So you could get you could get a few cards in your hand over the course of a five round or a 5-turn chase.
For sure, it can definitely build up. So yeah, that's the Jokers. And so just going back a little bit to the initiative to holding your turn, I think here, to me, raw, it really reads like you can't do that. But I mean, Shane did it, but that could be another thing of just like, it's Savage Worlds, it's more easygoing, and maybe it is raw. I don't know. It would change a lot of things though, because the way this plays, it's almost very chaotic. Having more control over the initiative can really change how a chase works. So it's really up to the GM. Maybe experiment either way. If you do multiple of these, maybe try it one way or another. But you'll see how it can really, really change it. So what are the kind of things you can do on your turn, Carl?
Well, on your turn, there's 2 things you essentially can do. You can do an action, like a normal action that you would normally do. You can attack, like you mentioned in the start there, cast a spell, what have you. And then the second item that you can do is the chase roll. And the chase roll is the way you get chase tokens, which we know who gets the most tokens wins the chase, right? So you're trying to get chase tokens. And now it acts like an action. So if you want to do a chase roll and you want to do an action, it's a multi-action, and you get the penalty on both of them. So it's just another action in a sense in that turn, but it's the action that gets you the chase tokens. An
action gets you 1 chase token. A raise will get you 2 chase tokens.
Yeah, raise will get you 2 chase tokens. Now, what's interesting is I mentioned the items on the card where you got complications, ongoing. One of them is counterattack. So there's 3 of these. Counterattack is if you do an attack and you miss it, it's like your opponent has the counterattack edge. So that's something to watch for on the cards if you are going to do some combat, that might come into play.
But so on doing combat and melee, all that stuff, so what actually determines ranges, which I think was brilliant for them, and I actually like this even more than the normal chase rules. So normal chase rules, depending on how many cards you are different, that determines the ranges based on what kind of vehicle you're in. And here, it's the relative range is based on how many chase tokens you have. So if you have 3 chase tokens and somebody else has 3 chase tokens, then you're in adjacent melee range. And then each chase token different is 10 inches. So it's a really, really smart, dynamic way. I think they did a really good job on that to do ranges, because you don't have to set up cards beforehand like normal chases.
Yeah. Super simple.
You just get the chase tokens. Very simple, very easy to get ahead of. So that's with counterattack. If you're on the same amount of chase tokens, then you can melee attack, and then everybody is acting like they have the counterattack edge. And then at the very end, again, like we said, if the prey has the most, they get away. If it's tied or the pursuer has the most, then they catch them, and the GM kind of decides how that goes. Either it's a battle or whatever else happens. Some of the other important keywords is complication. Unlike normal chase and dramatic tasks, that doesn't mean it's a club. It just means that when there's a complication, we didn't go through every single card. I can't remember while clubs are generally the worst cards in the deck. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's complications on non-club cards. I do know that not all club cards have the complication keyword, but all that complication means is that that character cannot benefit from support. So it's really not that big of a deal. It's not an extra minus.
I'm looking.
Although, okay,
those cards
will often have. Yeah, okay, so maybe it's not on every single club, but it's maybe only on the clubs. But they also have like the worst negatives to your chase rolls. To your chase rolls. And
So
then
yeah,
the
talk
third
about
one,
that. So I alluded to it. What's a complication is you're nobody can
you
help
can't
you with
benefit from
support. You said that.
Yeah,
I mentioned counterattack. That's another thing that could be on the card, and that is where we just mentioned they can counterattack if you miss. And then the last one is ongoing, which I really didn't talk about. But ongoing means for the entire turn, the thing on the card lasts. So, like for example, on the 5 of spades drop back, it's ongoing, and it says the first attack from each enemy this round must be directed at you. So for the entire turn, ongoing, any enemy attack is directed towards me. It's not just when I played this card. It's for the entire. It's for the entire turn. The entire turn.
Yeah. So when it's revealed, those effects. So it's not when you start your turn if you have the ongoing card.
Thank
it's
you for
when
clarifying.
all of the cards are revealed, and that means so complication and counterattack I think are actually pretty minor. They don't. Their things don't really affect that much. Maybe counterattack. I think complication is probably the one that you don't have to worry about the most. But again, they're on the kind of worst cards anyways. You know, some people might be getting supported, but I don't think it happens that much. Ongoing cards are huge. Those really, really, really change the feel of a round, like completely. And some of those are like individual effects, like Carl's card, and some affect everybody. Like I forget the card, but it's one that's everybody can only do one action the entire round. That's a big one. So ongoing is the biggest one. Okay, those are the very, very basic rules. Some of the let's talk about some of the we've a little bit about some of the rules quirks. One of the things that it's not written down in there, but Carl, you saw in the example video, is that you don't have to take all your chase tokens. So if you get a raise and you get 2, you can choose just to take 1. Now, that might seem weird, but when we've played with this card system, there is weird times where if you're chasing them, you can greatly overtake them by getting 2 chase tokens. And then you're kind of like super far ahead, which depending on the chase might be good, but it's also kind of weird if you want to be closer to provide support or power ranges. So it is more tactical. I do like this better. Even though it's not written down, I think 100% you should be allowed to only take 1, if not 2. Otherwise, it's weird, you know?
Yeah, I think especially,
right,
well, especially when the example that Shane was doing when this came up, it was a big deal to kind of cut down these. So in his example, there's these goblins who stole somebody's sword and now you're chasing them down. In that example, they were cutting down the goblins' forces, the amount of forces as they go. And so being on the same token allowed the melee attacks for the one person who's really was a melee fighter, period. And that allowed them to do that because in his mind, again, this is a GM thing, right? Depending on how you're going to play it. In his mind, if the players won the chase, that just means a regular combat was going to happen. They've cornered these goblins and they're going to fight them to get the sword back versus the sword just, you won the chase, therefore you have the sword, right? So that was an important aspect. And that's why he asked a number of times, do you want to take all your tokens? So anyway.
I think that you should definitely play it that way because it doesn't make sense. And you should never be punished for rolling too well. That just doesn't make sense, right? So, and you could be punished if you were a melee character or for whatever reason. So, absolutely, you should be able to only be able to take 1. I think. Well, let's talk a little bit about before we give our final thoughts on it. Let's talk a little bit about the quirks of it. I mean, some of the things in here that you'll notice is that the higher initiative cards often have the worst bonuses to chase rolls. Pretty much universally. So that means if you're going later in the round, you have better chance to then roll forward. So again, when you're only getting 1 card at a time, there's no strategy there. But when you start getting multiple cards, then there is strategy of, do I want to go sooner and do stuff to people, or do I want to go later and have a better chance to get ahead?
Yeah, so they did a really cool job of balancing. It's not all great to go first, right? There's a balance that you have to take. Yeah.
There is a lot of chaos, though. There's a ton of chaos in these. It can really go either way. So a lot of the quirks of this, I would say, are this definitely does the job of being, you don't have to do any setup. People don't have to learn chase rules because chase rules are often in Savage Worlds the one that's taught last or not done that much. So you kind of have to go over, what are all the chase rules? This is you can explain those basics and just start going, and all the things are on the tin. So you don't need to explain any rules to people. So it is very quick. I do think because it has an endpoint, a lot of the chases that you might do, it's not just like how a normal chase is you just get away. Um, if the players are the ones chasing the things, or a lot of times you might have something like in our one of the games that we played, it was like you need to get, if you're caught, then it's bad. Then it's going to be a big battle. You don't want to. You don't want to. Like you want to get behind the protection of the city walls, say, because during the chase you could be just killing off everybody. So in that case, it just feels like, well, why didn't you just have a battle? If it's like if it's easier for the players to just kill off everybody, then you should just do a normal combat. So it might not apply in every chase, or you have to have a big reason to have a chase. I guess maybe I'm getting a little convoluted there, but
well, chase is what adds the motion to the combat. I mean, in the end,
yeah, that's true.
It's got combat elements to it, but it's the motion that it adds that axis, right? Versus it's a set piece. Everybody's fighting. Well, this is different than that because there's that particular axis of the combat that's not represented during your normal combat.
Yeah, but it is very chaotic. So I think these things, because of the not because you failed a roll or anything, honestly, because these card effects are so powerful or debilitating, depending, that it can really swing the chase whether you catch or not. And it's you're a lot of the time I feel like you're just making up or adjusting to the card effects more than anything, because they're so wild. And you can, clearly a lot of these chases, like by round 3, the GM could be like, okay, you got away, because there's points where like the one side has so many more chase tokens than the other person that kind of like in a normal chase where they're 3 away, they're 4 away, and then you have to make that roll to flee. It could be even shorter than 5 rounds, is my point, because of like the wildness of the card effects. I don't know if you have the same opinion on that.
Well, I think that's the wildness that the card effects. I mean, that's the whole sexiness of the deck is that's what creates
definitely
the narrative side of it. With the picture and and the effect, and it's crazy. I don't know if I completely agree that after when you get to 3, it may be so lopsided, because there's cards in here that take tokens from people. Just like off the bat. And so you might be 3 ahead and suddenly you take a token away and then somebody rolls their chase and gets a raise. It's all even again, right? So that's part of the swing, right? That's what you were talking about. There's cards that'll take a token away from somebody just like that.
It
just changes the nature of what's going on, as well as so it's kind of cool. There's a lot of, I didn't read all of them because we played a few games through, but there's a lot of really cool effects in here.
Yes, and what all I meant, maybe like round 4, but you can get to the point where there's like you're 6 or 7 chase tokens ahead, and
then
that's fine. That's the nature of the game, and it's the quick chase deck, and the chaoticness of the card effects is like you said, is the sexiness. That's what is bringing it to make it kind of crazy. Don't expect it as necessarily tactical as a normal chase rules. This is my only point. It's more chaotic than normal chase. Because while normal chases just have like initiative and the complications that come with that, with like clubs and stuff, you don't have that. This is much more chaotic than normal chases. That was my only point.
Yep.
Also, depending on the amount of players and the amount of, one thing for the GM to consider is whether you do these by group rolls or you have each group maybe only getting 1 card, but then each of them do their own actions. That can really change the time, of course. Also, the more groups are getting their own cards, the more like cards are going around. Because like you said, there's cards that will say you draw 2 cards, but there's also cards that will be like give a card to all your people on your side. And those people have more cards that might give them more cards. So there is a snowball effect. If you have larger groups, there'll just be bigger hands going around because there's these things that giving cards to other players. So that will kind of change things in that way. You'll have more cards in each group or character. Any other like quirks or opinions before we give our judgment?
To go to what you were saying with the cards, I think avoiding on from the GM side too many groups, right? That would have a card. because they are such wild cards, right? So if you have too many of the opponents getting cards, they're going to have too many of those effects, and it could really sway the tide. I think you really need to lean it towards the players and have the players have more cards than kind of the GM's group of folks. Even in the example, Shane had 2 groups of goblins, but he played 1 card for both groups at the same time. He didn't give each group its own chase card. So
I think
something to think about. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is good for the GM to have maybe 2 or at the most 3, maybe like different wild cards or groups doing it. But you could even split it up. Like, say you had normal goblins and like goblin. I think they're like marauders or something. And they, as a group, only got 1 card. But then maybe you did a group roll for the goblins and a group roll separately for the marauders when they would, like, say, attack. Or, if you didn't want to do each individual one, you could still split them up, but only giving them 1 card, like you said. I think it is good to keep it at, like, for the GM side, to keep it maybe at a max of 3. I probably would not want to go over that as the GM. And I think 2 to 3 is probably a good spot for how many different cards your guys are getting. Otherwise, it does get too crazy, and it's hard for the GM. It's definitely hard for us. We're playing on virtual tabletops, which is going to be much more fiddly and hard to do. Also, they do not have a, you can't buy this as like a virtual tabletop thing at all. They don't have that. I don't know if they ever will. So you kind of have to manually cut the cards out and put them in either Roll20 or Foundry, whatever. So it can be a little clunky depending on what thing you're using. It's definitely easier, of course, in person, and there's no programming for it online. So it's definitely a little bit harder to use online than like a normal chase, right? Which would be easier to do on most of these virtual tabletops.
Right, because a normal chase is just normal cards that all these things basically support. These you've got to import because you need the text and you need the chase numbers and all that.
Yeah,
all that
and people aren't playing cards like normal chases use normal initiative, and you're putting cards down on the table. Most of them have support for that. So, yeah.
So I mean, I guess those are kind of some of our opinions on it, but what do you like it?
I absolutely do. I really like it. I think it is the quick chase. Like it does what it says what it wants to do. It definitely is a quick chase. There's no setup. Again, it really is only for foot or horseback riding, and it's people might be confused and think that it's a fantasy only thing. It really is not. There's nothing really inherently fantasy-esque on these cards that I can even I mean, right? I can't think of anything that's specifically
I haven't seen
fantasy
anything
at all.
But again, I haven't read them all. But it's
the
all
pictures
mechanics. They're all mechanics.
It's all mechanics. The pictures are definitely fantasy.
Sure.
But there's no reason you couldn't use this for post-apocalypse or science fiction, running around in Mos Eisley or something in Star Wars, whatever. There's nothing about it, just the pictures. The one thing I would say, though, it definitely leans a little bit more to the urban side of chases. I think there's a little bit of weirdness for, like, say, a nature, right? Like some of the cards, it's not that bad, but some of the cards are like, there's a crowd, so innocent bystanders. That's not really an issue if you're in nature. I mean, maybe there's a flock, a bunch of bunnies looking at you. You don't want to kill a bunny because you're a druid or something, but,
not Bambi's mother.
Yeah, Bambi's mother is going to get killed. So I think there's a little bit of bent in, like, as an urban chase, but not necessarily. You can work around it. You can still do it in most. I think you can still use it. It's just like, while there's no fantasy bent in this at all, except for the artwork, there is a bent for the kind of being in like a populated area, but I think you could overcome it. So yeah, I do think it does its job. It's a really fun, quick way of doing foot chases. And I think, like I said, you could use it for most things. And the narrative part definitely works. I think maybe when you first start doing it, it gets lost but it is, I like how it has those things and you can could draw inspiration from it. You don't have to. And it's fun if your group likes that, it is fun to like add like, this is what my character does, or the GM says, okay, well, you ran into a crowd and that's why you kind of get lost behind somebody's wearing like a big headdress and that's why they can't see you anymore or something. Like there's those narrative elements that you can bring in. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth it for Savage Worlds players. It feels more like it's a board game, right? This is more than any other thing I've ever seen in a tabletop game. This is a straight party card game. Like I said, this is similar to like I Am I Dark Overlord or something. Like it plays like a board game.
Yeah, it is kind of
fun to have that board game element.
I was going to say the rules, and we talked about them, right? The rules are that much, and then part of it's an example on the back, right? So these
Yeah.
are the rules, and you take the cards. You know, if it doesn't, you just have like an archetype card that has a couple of skills and the things that might be used, and you could pull the deck out and just have at it and have some fun. You know, I totally agree. It's definitely a cool prop. I'm looking forward to for conventions writing some games that take advantage of the cards, because then in their physical form, they're so much more fun, I think.
Yes, definitely. And I wanted one more tip that I think, I don't know if you agree with me, that just before we stop, is that when you're setting it up, I think giving the prey at least one chase token to start. They don't talk about that, but it mostly, that seems better to me playing it, because when you start on the same chase token, it's just like a straight battle immediately, pretty much.
Yeah,
And it doesn't feel like you're really doing a chase yet. Yeah, you're just like, why aren't you doing a battle? So I highly recommend that most of the time you give them probably just one chase token to start, the prey. So they're just a little bit ahead, and then it really does feel like a chase. Otherwise, it just feels like a battle. Do you right?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Okay.
I think that's important. So, hey, I think we've kind of covered that. Chase Deck is pretty cool. I'm super glad that I was able to find a copy of it at Gen Con. And now I have my deck that I can use for my events in the future. So,
Nice.
someday, Eric and I
everybody
will go to a
Gen
convention
Con.
together.
Go to a Gen Con. Well, yeah, we just live so far apart. But go to Gen Con and find one of Carl's games, and you'll maybe get to play one of these.
Yeah, maybe we'll use a chase deck. So anyway, this is Tabletop Tango with Eric and Carl, and look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support. We'd love you to check out the website and check out the podcast, masteringtherpg.com, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.
Happy gaming.
It's a savage world. Strangers are weird war. It's a savage world. Classics to explore. It's a savage world.